Next up, an interview with author and psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson, telling us about the moment he realized he didn't know anything and how it changed his political thinking. Well, check this out.
I'll tell you a story about what changed my political thinking when I was very young. When I was 13 to 16, I worked with a Socialist Party in the province of Alberta, which is where I grew up. And I was fortunate enough to know the leader of the Socialist Party in my province, home province of Alberta, who was the only opposition member of parliament in the whole province. It was like 36 conservatives and 1 socialist. And the only reason the people in my home district voted for this man was because he was a good man. He was a labor leader, and most of the socialists at that time in Canada were former labor leaders. And they did stand, at least in part, for the genuine interests of the working class. Anyways, I worked with them for a few years, and I got disenchanted in part because when I went to the conventions of the party, I met the radical types, and they were the same as they are now. And I thought, what the hell's up with you people? You're just bitter and resentful. Like, you claim to be caring for the poor, but that's just a lie. You're just bitter and resentful. And you think morality consists of praying in public, right? It's like you hold a sign that says, I'm against poverty. It's like, well, who the hell isn't against poverty? That's not I'm for poverty. It's like, more homeless. So, because it makes me feel better by comparison. It's like nobody thinks that. And so that set up a cognitive dissonance in my imagination. I thought, well, if this end of the political distribution has the moral upper hand, why the hell is it producing all these resentful activists? And now, that's a question that we're asking ourselves in spades now. But then I was nominated. I served on the board of governors of this little college that I went to, Grand Prairie Regional College, and all of the people who were on the board were people, I presume, people like you. They were all owners of small businesses, and they'd been successful. And the towns that I grew up in northern Alberta were like 50 years old. They'd just been scraped out of the prairie. It was the last of the frontier, and everyone there was an immigrant. So most of the people who had started these small businessmen were immigrants who came there with nothing and built something. And even though I didn't share their political views, I found them individually admirable. And I also found that the same applied to the small businessmen that I worked for at that point. I thought, well, you've actually done something with your life, and there's a solidity there, a productive solidity.
Exactly.
And so it was at that point that I realized I didn't know anything and just stopped working on the political front altogether. I decided at that point to become a psychologist rather than a lawyer or a politician, which is kind of where I was heading at that point in my life. And I realized that it was the people who had built productively that had the moral upper hand. They might not have been very good at expressing their ethos intellectually or explicitly, but in terms of their character, they had established a victory. And I think this is actually the problem on the conservative front, broadly across the world, is that they're people of solid character, but they're not good at articulating the foundations of their ethos. And then when the radical leftists come along and take them apart ethically, they don't know what to do. They throw up their hands. Because, think about it this way. If someone comes up to you on the street and says, justify marriage. And you think, well, I thought we sorted that out like 25,000 years ago. You don't know what to say. You have no idea how to justify marriage. A lot of the things we do in our life that are ethical, we act out. We don't think through. Like, I presume the vast majority of you put up a Christmas tree. Well, you have no idea why. And if someone, anthropologist, came over to your house and said, well, why do you put up a Christmas tree? You'd say, well, everyone does it. Something like that. And it's beautiful and it's part of a tree. But you have no idea why. There are reasons for the Christmas tree. That's a place where you put the light that shines in the darkness at the darkest time of the year. And that light signifies, in the Christian tradition, that light signifies Christ, and that signifies the service of the highest to the lowest. And you're acting that out, but you don't know it. And when you're married, you're acting out a very deep ethos as well, and you don't know what it is, but everyone's agreed on it. And a lot of your conservative virtues are things that everybody's already agreed on. And so when an intellectual comes along and says, justify that, You don't know what the hell to say. And then you can be picked apart. Well, isn't your ideal of marriage heterosexual, long-term, stable, child-centered couples, isn't that exclusionary? And isn't the exclusion wrong? Well, you think, well, exclusion, yeah, well, that's wrong, and well, I don't know. And then you're guilty. And it isn't because you're wrong, it's just that you don't know how to articulate that traditional value. And that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. And the same thing applies on the profit front. It's like, it's hard to articulate why that's acceptable. Also because it does seem like if you're generating profit, it's obviously the case that that can be used by you for narrow personal reasons, right? You can buy a yacht and fill it with supermodels and cocaine if you want. But people don't. And most wealthy people in the United States, by the way, are like you. They're the owners of not immense businesses, small to moderate businesses, and they're very conservative in their consumerist habits and careful in their distribution of their resources. They're not like Hollywood hedonists, or the Wall Street psychopath types. Not that all Wall Street people are psychopath types, but the kind that are parodied in movies. You're people who are very careful with your capital and you live moderately. That's also a sign of that ethos, but it's hard for conservatives to articulate that. Doesn't mean you're wrong, and it doesn't mean that you should be guilty.
One of the ways you combat those kinds of things, if you don't have, number one, don't have to have an argument. You just have to be right and just keep moving.
Yeah.
But I don't have to defend. I don't have to enter into that conversation. Like, yeah, you're a nut, and I'm moving on.
Yeah, partly we're in a situation where you probably do have to learn to articulate it, because what's happening is that central ethos, that traditional ethos, even voluntary exchange, it's under such vicious attack that if you don't learn to defend it and articulate it, it's going to be taken from you. And that probably means, I suspect that means that each of you is going to have to think to some degree about how to involve yourself in at least the local political landscape. It's like, what the school boards are doing, or maybe you don't and you should. I mean, these low-level political positions have been occupied by radical types, and the only real solution to that is to take them away and occupy them with people who have some sense. And the problem is you probably have something better to do. But doesn't matter, because at the moment, if you abdicate that responsibility, then the radicals are going to take it, and then they're going to take what you have. That already happened in the universities. We abdicated our responsibility as professors, and the radicals took the institutions from us. And as far as I'm concerned, they're gone. We're not getting them back. They're done. So what happened in the universities is the administration took over the faculty. The faculty retreated 3,000 steps. The administration took over the faculty, and then the DEI radicals took over the administration. And the same thing's happening on the corporate front. And the way that you're enabling that, I don't know how relevant this is to everybody in the room, but you hire an HR person, you hire a DEI consultant, you start playing that game maybe to keep the critics off your back, they will take you out. Don't do that. That's a big mistake. You think, well, we have to play the public relations game. We have to look like we're appeasing the radicals. You can't appease a snake. It's a big mistake.